Welcome back to the Composing Made Simple podcast. This is episode 8. On today's episode, we're going to discuss everything that's related to business. What should you charge, your rates? Should you charge per minute? Should you charge hourly? Or should you do a package deal? Also, we're going to dive into some sample servers. Curtis recently picked up some older computers that he's utilizing for a big sample server. So we're going to go in depth with that, talk about that using Vienna Ensemble Pro. And then finally, we're going to go into our picks of the week. And as always, we hope you enjoy this episode. So let's get into it.
Composing made simple. We talk about something new every show. Composing made simple. Grab a coffee, have a seat, and let's go.
So we've been meaning for a long time to do a segment on sort of the business side of things, not really going super in deep, but sort of touching on questions, what common issues there are when you're sort of putting together the financial side of things. I mean, you want to get paid to write music, and part of that is actually the getting paid part. I mean, so many of us creative people, I feel like, just want to go into our little room and do our thing and be creative and commune with the universe or whatever. But at the same time, you do have to, at times, deal with the legal and the financial side of things. So we just kind of wanted to do a segment about that, kind of explain what experiences each of us have had and what questions have come up, and try to just give as much advice as we can on this. So Chris, you've been sort of asking us some questions about financial stuff. What in your experience has been sort of the most confusing, most difficult thing to kind of figure out as you are sort of I don't want to say at the beginning of your career, because you're pretty established actually, but when you were starting out, like what questions, what is the thing that is the most confusing to you?
Yes, that's an awesome question. And I would definitely say that I'm at the beginning of my career, because you're into this and I'm only starting to get these couple of gigs, and each one is a very good learning experience. So one that I wanted to share with everybody is that there was a filmmaker that reached out to me, and he told me about this film that's going to be in production. It's actually a documentary, and basically he told me his budget, which is around 15 to 20,000, but he wanted to see if any local musicians or people online could write some music for him that was a little bit cheaper. And so that was one of the questions I had. Is it better to charge hourly? Is it better to charge per piece? And how much would be a good starting rate or a good ballpark rate? So I was thinking that he was saying the funding would be needed or would be available October 1st, and then they'd start the filming and stuff like that. And so it's a while away, but while we're still on this topic, I wanted to kind of cover that and see what you guys' perspectives would be on how much to charge for something like this, for like a documentary film that's not necessarily like a blockbuster, but it's kind of a smaller type of media outlet. So
Well, I'll just gonna say this. I'll go come in. I mean, it's not pertaining to music, but just like freelancing. And since you're getting started in your career, your expenses might not be too bad. You don't have a house, family, and all that like me and Curtis do. So I think, the best piece of advice here for when you're coming up with rates is, okay, how much time is this gonna get out of my work time? Future projects or projects that I might be able to take in place of that. So how much do I need to make? To make sure I'm hitting, my monthly expenses. That's where I would start first for that. And then obviously, like, we said, you're kind of starting your career, but, how much do you think you're worth? Maybe talk to some other composers, or maybe do some research and see what other people are charging. And then, kind of base yours on there and your experience. That's the best thing I can say. But I think start first with, your monthly expenses and how much do I need to make sure I'm living comfortably. Don't feel ashamed that, if you have to charge $50 an hour or $100 an hour, $300, that's you. And that's, because at the end of the day, you want people that want to pay your worth. You know what I mean? You don't want to work for free. You don't want to work for $10 slaving and somebody taking advantage of you. So make sure when you're setting your rates that that's what you think you're worth, and that make sure it's going to cover your expenses. That's just been my kind of experience with this, or what I've heard other composers or just people in business, in generally. Curtis?
And that absolutely makes a lot of sense, by the way. And you're right. I'm not in that position yet where I do own a house and a family, or have a family, I should say. So yeah, considering it from that point of view, covering the expenses first is definitely something you should consider, I'd say.
Yeah, because think about it. If this film's going to take you 3 months or a month of your time, that's a month that you're not working on other things. So
Right.
make sure that's going to
Right.
pay for everything that you need for that month.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of rates, I always think about this in the following way. There are basically, um, you know, two places where you make money with music, or anything where there's intellectual property, where you're making intellectual property. There's the front end, and then there's the back end. So the front end is you pay me, say $500 per produced minute of music. So the person orders 10 minutes of music for you. They, give you $5,000. You produce, or maybe they give you 2,500. You produce the music, then they give you the other 2,500. That's all money that you make on the outset of the project before the project is complete, right? Because you're putting your music on, the project's not done till you're done. Then there is the back end. So if this is like a film, is this going to be making a continuous revenue stream for somebody? So is it going to be broadcast, on TV at all? Is it going to be sold on, whatever? Is it going to be on streaming, something like that? And in most scenarios, there is a structure, especially if you're a member of some sort of performing rights organization like ASCAP or BMI, for you to get paid off that back end at least a little bit. So we can talk about sort of more the mechanics of that, but in terms of like the overall picture, that's how I think about the compensation. Another back end might be, soundtrack sales. Are they going to, slap the film's poster on an album and sell it?
Right.
Depending on how each side of that works, the rates might be different. If these people are wanting to do a total buyout where they get to use the music, they're going to sell the soundtrack. They have exclusivity to it. You don't get to use it on your own to make money. I mean, sometimes I've worked on projects where there is no exclusivity. So I still own the intellectual property and distribution rights and publishing rights and everything for this music. I could go sell it on royalty-free sites if I wanted to. So in those cases, my front end is maybe a little bit lower than it would normally be, right? Maybe it's only, 400 or 200 a minute. 200 is pretty low. Depending on that back end, you can sometimes negotiate stuff. In the game world, one of the best revenue things that I've come up with is revenue sharing, where you get a percentage of the game's sales just straight off the top before they even do profit. That's can be a really great arrangement. Now that can also be a bad arrangement, because if the game doesn't sell well, you're sort of you're risking something for that. So there are lots of different ways to set rates. I would suggest that, especially at the level you're working at, Chris,
Yes.
that you I would not charge less than, I would say, probably 300 a minute in almost any scenario. I'm sorry, I didn't have the number quite in my mind when I was thinking about it, but 300 a minute is pretty low. A AAA game right now is paying something like 1,200 a minute. Okay, so you're operating at about a fourth of the per minute rate. Now, when you do that, I would highly suggest that you say, hey, look, I'll charge you $300 a minute for produced music, but I want to sell the soundtrack on my own. I don't want you to sell it. So, they'll give you, and tell them, I want to be able to use maybe like the logo of the film or a piece of art or a frame from the film or something. And I get to sell it on iTunes, Bandcamp, whatever. At 300 a minute, I would say that's definitely a reasonable request. And that's good because that gives you that front end and that back end, because as long as that soundtrack is for sale, you have the possibility of continuing to sort of up that per minute rate by selling that, right? So I think that is a useful thing. In my experience, I have always had a hard time having high rates. That's something that I don't like to ask for, because again, I'm definitely that person who's creative. I don't want to screw it up. I don't want them to go find somebody else at the outset. But generally you'll find that if you charge a higher rate, most people are okay with it, and it's not the end of the world if they come back to you and say, look, that's really not in the cards. What can you do? And you can bring them down. Like, most people will ask you to bring it down first before they go find somebody else. So I'd say charge a little bit, charge on the higher end. You'd be surprised at how well that goes for you. And you'd be surprised at how that invests you with a sense of self-worth, that my music is worth this. Look at these people who are paying me for it. It helps your confidence go up, and the next time when it's time to ask for a rate, you feel a little bit less bad about maybe charging even more for the next thing. So I have struggled with that. I know that it's hard. Most people will not just drop you if your per minute is too high. They will come back and ask you,
Counter.
hey,
Right, and
can we
it's
find
great that you say that. It's great that you say that because the other day actually I had a client of mine who I've worked with twice now. He like the first couple times he had a couple songs that he wanted me to orchestrate, and so for those I kind of wanted to get to know him well, and I didn't want to overcharge, so I think I charged, I think it was 200 to do the orchestration or whatever, and for a 3-minute song, and obviously that was on the lower end. So this time the project was a little bit different. He had a piano piece that he wanted me to kind of mock up from beginning to end without any piano track, and so obviously that would take a little more time, plus the piece has a few more chord changes in it, and I was thinking I kind of want to go a little higher, but I don't want to jump so high that it puts him off. So I quoted him 400, and I held my breath for a little bit. And he's like, "Let me think about it." And he had posted that piano version on Facebook, and it was getting a pretty good response. So he got back to me the next day, and he said, "I've thought about it, and I think it would be worth it because people seem to enjoy it, whatever." So sometimes these risks do pay off, and I guess the great thing is that as you become more established, you can gradually raise your rates and whatever.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a good learning experience. Yeah.
Every project I do has been at a higher rate than the one before. Every single one.
Yep.
Every single one.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just gonna say here is, if you really love the project, of course, you're gonna do whatever. If you really believe in the project, then cost doesn't really matter. But like as you're already finding out, Chris, if people love what you do, they're gonna pay what you ask mostly.
Sure.
If they really love it and they know that, hey, you're gonna uplift my film, my game. You know what I mean? So as you can see, he did a test. He put the track out there, and people were responding to it. So he's like, okay, it's worth my investment because look at the reaction I'm getting. So yeah, but can I just stop the brakes here real quick and talk about something I don't think we really talk about. I don't know if this really proclaims to the composing world, but I know for songwriting, publishing. Make sure you own your publishing. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you create a publishing company. This is very important. Don't get screwed. So if you're just starting out, you can go online and do this. It's pretty simple now. Create your own publishing company because you want to retain the rights to your music.
You don't even need, by the way, to own a company necessarily. You don't even need to start an LLC. You can go to BMI and ASCAP and register yourself as a publisher of record, so that when you go to say who is the writer on this and who is the publisher, they will both exist. For example, I am in the ASCAP system as Curtis Schweitzer, but I also have a publisher in the ASCAP system as Curtis Schweitzer Music, so that when I go to, because remember, if something gets broadcast on TV, there's a 50-50 split between the writer and the publisher, and if you don't claim publishing rights, guess who's going to? The TV studio, and they're going to take 50% right off the top.
So I just wanted to mention that because it's very important. Make sure you always
Very good
retrieve,
advice.
because what you can do with your track, and Curtis kind of alluded to this, is you can license your track and still make money after it was used in a film or whatever. If you own it, you can do whatever you want with it. You could sell it, stuff like that. I know this comes up more in the songwriting kind of band world because, like commercials, people like to license their music to commercials, stuff like that. So if you don't own the publishing rights, they don't get paid, the artists. And that happened a lot in the olden days. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Make sure that you owned your, publishing.
And register with a PRO, ASCAP or BMI, just so that you're in the system. Chris, you're talking about doing a film. They should probably be doing cue sheets.
Right.
You can find templates for those on both ASCAP and BMI. They now both use the same cue sheet, so you can get the Excel file from them. It's awesome. It goes through and, you say my music was on minute 330 to minute 4, and it will automatically calculate that's 0.5 minutes.
Right.
And it will and you file that with ASCAP, and then if that film ever gets even shown on local community access, you get paid a little bit. It's awesome. It's great. And once a year you get a check for 5 cents. It's great.
You're getting paid to be.
5
You're
cents.
actually getting paid,
Better
so
than
you're
5
legit.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great. Yeah. No. Those are some great answers. And actually, a follow-up question, which I asked you guys a bit later, was I had a project where a client was asking me to do a mock-up for them. So they had already done the composition. They were asking for a mock-up, and I think it was about let's say 3 to 3.5 minutes, something like that. So
what would be again a good kind of starting rate, and is it better to charge hourly, or is it better to charge for the project, amount of detail it might require, that kind of thing?
I think for a mock-up,
Yeah.
I would charge probably by the hour because, how long is it going to take you to do that mock-up? I mean, that's just me. I mean, I don't know if there's a better way, Curtis. Like I said, this is kind of out of my wheelhouse right now. So
yeah, I'm not super experienced with not my music. Like when I make a rate, 90% of that rate is because I came up with these ideas for you. So you're taking someone else's ideas, so the rates are going to be lower. It does seem to me like hourly is a good incentive structure here, because if somebody comes to you and says, I want you to mock up this really easy piece to mock up for full orchestra, you're able to, push it out really, really fast. If you're charging on a per minute rate, that could get you the same amount as if that were really hard, as if it required, had a lot of articulation changes, whatever like that. So it seems to me like hourly is better there. I think most orchestrators I've seen usually work, it's usually when it's like going to be recorded by a live orchestra, right? So they actually work, I believe, on a per page basis.
Okay.
So that's obviously different because a mock-up is, right, it's doesn't have pages.
Right.
So I would say, either I would say I would have different rates depending on the number of instruments, or I would just charge hourly. It seems like hourly is a good incentive structure there, just because of what I said. It could be complicated.
Yeah.
If somebody's got, chromatic string runs for 2 minutes, that's going to take a lot longer to mock up than a few horn chords or whatever. So,
or I recommend.
I would say.
Oh, sorry, Curtis.
I don't know what a good rate for that is, though.
Well,
I would say at least 100.
Yeah.
Because again, you got to think, how much money have you invested in sample libraries that you're able to do this mock-up? How much have you invested in mixing to be able to produce this mock-up? $100 an hour is probably what just a mix engineer makes at the low end. So honestly, I wouldn't go much lower than that.
Yeah.
And then you get a lot of apps that do time tracking. I'm sure Todd can talk about time tracking more than I can.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, Curtis, is like just give it a shot, like do an hourly thing, and then go through your experience once and seeing how many hours you spend. So track that. How much did this really take you from mock-up, to doing all the articulations, and then doing the post-production of the mixing, mastering, all that stuff, and see how long it's going to take you, and then see if I'm going to charge hourly, and I only worked 4 hours, so you just made $400. Now, was that worth your time? You see what I'm saying? It's always about time. Because remember, we only have so much time. So how much are you worth? And obviously, getting started and stuff, you can't charge $1,000 an hour. We get that. So I would say do that, and then it's kind of trial and error, but $100 seems pretty good. Or you just do a flat fee, because how long it's going to take you, but it depends on the piece, like Curtis said. I would have a package deal kind of thing, or an hourly, or whatever you feel comfortable with. But I say after you do it a few times, I think you'll really nail it down and know that. Or just go do a Google search on people that do mock-ups and see what they charge.
Right.
Just get an idea and see how they do it.
Yeah.
But it's got to work for you. Since you, like you said, since you don't have a family and all that stuff. Go ahead.
I would add up, so this person wants an orchestral mock-up. Cool, awesome. What would it cost to buy all the libraries he would need?
Yeah,
true. You should charge maybe a little bit less than that.
Yes.
You got to make it worth his time. That at least gives you an idea of the ceiling, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ceiling is definitely what does all of Hollywood Orchestra cost, right?
True,
or all of Cine whatever orchestra. I know you use different orchestral samples than I do, but which by the way they're very good. That's your upper bounds, right? Because plus the time that you've spent with these samples to know what's going to sound good and which articulation patch to use, blah blah blah. So that probably gives you an upper limit. And if they come back and they're like, hey, that's too much, you're like, okay, go buy Cineb whatever.
You can negotiate, right?
Yeah. Go have a fun time. Go buy Hollywood Orchestra. Have fun.
Right.
Yeah. I'm gonna be a
It's good
Debbie
you guys
Downer
say
here for
that.
1 second. I know we don't talk about this, and Curtis has alluded to his business. Do some business research, and we have to be businessmen too. It is a business, so treat it as a business. And I think I've mentioned this before. So get some books on maybe entrepreneurship, or just basic business books, just to educate yourself on this stuff, because what I've always heard from people that are entrepreneurs is you're trading time for money. Okay, we only have so much time. So how much, if you're going to do a project, how much of that time that you're going to sink into that is it worth to you? You know what I mean? So that's how you got to look at it. I mean, yeah, we're creatives. We love creating music and stuff. But think about it. If you just did mock-ups all day, I think you get sick of it after a while, right? So it's like, but if you're good at it, great. But, at the end of the day, it's like, well, if it's going to take me 6 hours to do this mock-up plus the post-production and all this stuff, that's a lot of time. That's 6 hours you could have been doing something else. So what's that time, that 6 hours worth to you? Per money, and like I said, it always comes down to your expenses and what do you need to survive, to feed yourself and all this stuff. So that's what you got to look at it, and don't feel ashamed. And I know Curtis said this. Don't feel ashamed for what you think you're worth. Somebody will pay it, and if you have the projects and you have the skills, somebody will do it. Because that will speak for yourself. That's your that's your bread and butter. And that will do it for you. So that I guess that's we kind of keep coming back to that, and it's one of those things. It's going to be
quick
different.
Story.
Yeah, it's kind of different for everybody else. Like what you think you're worth, Curtis, is different from what Chris thinks and what I think.
Exactly.
So there's no right answer here, but these are good, kind of instructions or guidelines to follow just to get started, or if you're unsure about these things, just give it a shot.
Yeah. So I'd like to share what I ended up doing. So
yes,
we appreciate it. Yeah.
I took into consideration actually everything you guys said, and I ended up thinking about how long do I think it would take me, because I generally, when it comes to that situation, I ask them for the piece first, kind of like a demo of what they have, and then I kind of think about what it would take and what would be needed to add to it. And based on that, because I'm relatively comfortable with my style and my ability for it, I think that I can charge based on that. So I ended up charging based on how much time I think it would take me. I think it was about 5 or 6 hours or something like that. So I charged, because right now I'm doing about 70, 80 an hour. So I kind of based on that, and then they were, perfectly fine with paying that. So I just, did a flat rate, and I said I would include a couple of revisions. And I think just being upfront off the bat there, in that case, made it just easier to handle. So we didn't have to chat much about that afterwards, because they just paid a deposit, right, and then they paid their balance afterwards.
Cool.
So
and I think it comes down to experience, man. Like the more times you do this, you're gonna get a better idea, and you go, okay, I did that last time, and I think I got a little cheated the last time, or I don't think I got my you know what I mean. I think I gave them I was a little too cheap. So you're gonna figure this out, and that's how it is, But we're just trying to get best practice and guidelines so you don't get burned, because that's gonna be the worst. You spent 10 hours on something and you only charged $10 an hour. Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. Like when I first started, I felt like I was actually in the first, I say 2 months that I started doing it, I didn't feel like I was undercharging. Like I felt like I got to step in the door, I got to charge less than what I'm worth. But I think especially these last couple of months, I've realized that I've established myself somewhat now, so I can slowly begin to elevate a little bit.
Right, and I think you'll know that when it's time to go to raise your rates. Actually, for my freelancing stuff, I actually raised my rates this year. I was like, well, okay, I've already got a year or so under my belt freelancing, so I upped my price by $5. I still got to stay competitive because in my field it's very competitive, and freelancing is it's a it's a nightmare for what I do, because people don't want to pay, and you're gonna find that out too, even in any business, any music, whatever you do for a living, you're going to find that they're always going to try to undercut you, pay somebody that's experienced, but for less dollar. That's just the way the world works. Get used to it, but always stay firm on what you believe you're worth, okay? Because there's going to be somebody out there that will pay it if they love what you do.
Story.
Yeah.
I had a Audio Jungle finally allowed you to set your own prices, and I had for a while they had let you set them low. They wouldn't let you go over a certain number, but now they just kind of let you do whatever you want. So I had a bunch of stuff that was pretty low price because I had made it back before anyone knew who I was. So just on a whim, I went through my entire catalog and I tripled the price on every single thing I had. And the next month I had more sales.
Nice, man.
Dang, than you ever did.
Than I ever did. So
wow,
don't be afraid. You'd be surprised. There's also that sort of Apple.
I was just gonna say that.
Like, oh, it's expensive, it must be good, right? So there's that too. So keep that in mind.
I was just gonna talk about Apple. It's like here's people paying $3,000 for a computer when you can get a freaking desktop for $500. So yeah, but you got to make sure. Let's make this clear though. Make sure you're delivering a great product. looking.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you think you're worth something doesn't mean you are. Make sure your work and your product and everybody else thinks it's great. I mean, obviously that's subjective, but you know what I'm getting at. You know, just because you're getting out the gate and you think you're amazing and all this stuff, and you've heard a lot of people talk about it, but have you put the work and time in yet? Doesn't mean that you're worth that price yet. Because, but if people are paying for it, awesome. But just always keep that in mind. Be humble. That's the best thing advice I can get to somebody.
Right.
Always be humble. Be thankful for everything that you get, man. Because let me tell you, I'm hitting a rough patch this year with freelancing. I had about 3 or 4 projects that were, on the future, and they all disintegrated. So it can happen on a, if the market goes or something like that. But obviously, music's a different field because, even when the economic downturn, people still want to listen to music because that's what gets them out of, the downtime. So, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I'm just saying, it's like, don't be afraid to charge what you think you're worth. But I think Chris, like, just every time we meet, Chris, and you're always talking about this stuff, like I can tell, like, the experience is starting to grow on you, and you're starting to, you know what I'm saying? Like you're starting to figure it out.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. It just takes
It
time.
does take time.
Yeah, it just takes time, man. You got to be patient. Just like YouTube. If you want to do YouTube and Twitch and all this stuff, it's not going to happen overnight, man. It's going to take a year, 2 years. Sometimes it takes people 10 years to get, somewhere. And I know you just got 1,000 subscribers, so congrats.
Yes, thank you.
It's a big achievement. I mean, a lot of people don't think it's 1,000. It's like, that's blood, sweat, and tears. I know. All right, so we're going to move on to our next topic, which actually is kind of interesting because Curtis is actually going through this right now, or I just went through it, is sample servers, to host our sample libraries. A lot of people I know work from one machine, but it is efficient to have a sample server. So Curtis wanted to kind of dive into this, and we wanted to talk about this and give you some options of what you can think about. I know me personally, I work from one machine currently. I have a 2013 Mac Pro with 64 gigs of RAM, and it works pretty well for what I need it for, but I'm not doing fully fleshed orchestral pieces like Curtis does. So, Curtis, if you want to go ahead and let everybody know what you just went through and what you picked up.
Yeah, so I guess I would start out by talking about how this works, because every time I see somebody talking about, Vienna or a sample server, the YouTube, especially on YouTube, the YouTube comments are always like, how does this work? What are you doing? And I understand that because it's a little confusing. So the way that this works is you need a piece of software called Vienna Ensemble Pro, which is probably the single most important piece of software made for composers, at least the ones who work with samples, probably ever. Because what it does is, so it allows you to host a VST on a machine that is different than the one where, say, your DAW, like Logic or Cubase, is running. So like Todd was saying, he runs a single machine. And so right now what he does is he fires up Logic or Cubase or whatever, Digital Performer. And that machine is both running the DAW for him and also hosting the samples, which he's got a really beefy machine, so that that works out. As your instrument count begins to rise, that stops working. So eventually, no matter how powerful your computer is, you're going to run into a situation where your main machine just can't handle all the processing, and that's where Vienna comes in. So when you buy Vienna, first of all, you need a Vienna key for every instance of Vienna you're going to be running. And so if you're going to be running multiple machines,
Yep.
You're going to need, two e-licensors minimum. And they're cheap. You can get them on Amazon for like $40.
If you have Cubase, you can use the Steinberg one.
Right. You can. Yeah. The e-licenser actually and the Steinberg are actually now the same. I don't think they used to be, but they are now.
Okay.
They are different than the iLock. So just keep that in mind. Dorico also uses the e-licenser. Everything from Steinberg uses it. So what happens is you install Vienna on one machine and you install Vienna on another machine. And on both machines, what it installs is it installs a VST plugin that you can use in the DAW, and it also installs a separate program that you run outside of the DAW called Vienna Server. Okay. And what this does is you go to the machine that isn't running your DAW, you start the server instance, And then you go back to the machine where your DAW is running and you load the VST plugin. It's just an instrument, just shows up like any other instrument in your list of instruments. And what happens is when you open the instrument plugin, it allows you to see if it's on the same gigabit network that the server instance, and you can connect to it, and the sample can actually run over there. So instead of worrying about having 27,000 SSDs and 2 terabytes of RAM in your main machine, you can just keep kind of adding new machines. And as they run out of resources, you can just add another machine. This is how Hans Zimmer, Junkie XL, all those high-end film composer people, you'll see them working, and their templates are massive. They'll have tens of thousands of contact instruments and play instruments and whatever running in one instance. They're not running those all on one machine. There is no machine that can possibly do that. But with Vienna, because it essentially modularizes your equipment, you can spread it out over lots of different servers. So the reason I wanted to talk about this is I was watching a Junkie XL video from I think last year, maybe the year before, where he was talking about how he used to buy these like $20,000 sample servers, these massive things with huge amounts of RAM and blah, blah, blah. And he said to himself, well, is there any way to make this cheaper? And so he actually found that on eBay you can buy used servers for super cheap. We're talking like $600 for a machine that has dual Xeons, 92 gigs of RAM. And the hard disk is a different question, but for $600, I mean, you go try to buy a dual core Xeon, a modern dual core Xeon machine, you can't get out the door for less than $5,000 if you're lucky, and that certainly will not have 92 gigs of RAM in it. Even those Mac Minis, which I think are really great, you're not getting out the door for under probably, what would you say, Todd, $3,000 to $4,000?
Yeah, probably something.
Yeah,
like that.
I mean they're expensive. And the thing that limits your sample count is not necessarily the CPU. It's the total number of cores on your CPU plus how fast is your disk and how much RAM can you put in the machine. So if you can find these machines that have enormous amounts of RAM and maybe less exciting processors but a lot of cores, you can do it. And so Junkie XL on his YouTube channel has a link, and I'll put it in the show notes too, to this server seller on eBay. That it's not like you don't bid on them, you just buy them direct. It's more of eBay as a store. And basically it seems like what they do is they buy up old servers that were in like data centers, and they refurbish them and they sell them for cheap, because we're talking about the server that I bought. It's got a dual core Xeon X5670. Now that processor is really old. That's like a 2010, 2011 processor, I think. So it's pretty old. It's almost 10 years old now. But again, there's 2 of them. They have 6 cores each. You don't care that it's old. Most Xeons today are not that much faster. I mean, they're significantly faster. But because these were the highest end of the highest CPUs at the time, they're still really good, and they can still, and since you're not really CPU limited a whole lot by your Vienna instances, this is a great way to save money. Mm-hmm. So now there's other stuff to think about, because when you're buying a server, it's a little bit different than buying just a regular PC. Now that's what I did last time I needed a sample server. I just bought a regular old PC by a boutique PC maker called Puget Systems, and it's just a regular computer. It's the sort of thing you would normally run games off of, or whatever I actually do sometimes. And which is, by the way, the other great thing about having a sample server. You can put a high-end graphics card in it and make it your gaming machine when it's not running samples. But yeah, I mean, that works really well. But there's these, I ran into some problems, and I just sort of wanted to talk a little bit about the things I ran into, the things you might run into when you're looking at this, because it's a little bit confusing. Okay, so the first thing you're gonna notice when these sample servers arrive is that they're not gonna have an operating system on them. Okay, because they were running Windows Server when they were, in some bank or whatever, or stock trader or, data center, whatever, when they were running Google. they were probably running Windows Server or Linux. Now, Vienna does not run well. Okay, Vienna is not officially supported on Windows Server. If you go to Vienna's page, you'll see they list the supported operating systems as Mac OS and Windows 7, 8, 10. So these are not. They do not officially support Windows Server. I hear that if you try to install Vienna on Windows Server, it's fine. I spent about a week going through Vienna's forums just trying to find any instance where the words Windows Server were used, and I found a lot of posts where people were like, hey, Windows Server isn't working because of this, or Windows, because it's a different operating system. It's designed to run like databases, right? Like high-end websites or whatever. So it's not always, it doesn't always have the same components as Windows 10, like Windows Consumer, Windows 10. And I found every time somebody was asking for support from Vienna on Windows Server, they would say, we don't support this. And the thread would close. So the cool thing about these Dell R610s that I found is that they run Windows 10 flawlessly. You do not need to buy Windows Server for them. Windows Server is expensive, by the way. They charge per core that you use, and they charge at least 3 times what a normal Windows install costs. Okay, so these run Windows 10 just fine. They see all the high-end stuff. They see the, a server typically has a backplane that can run RAID, meaning you can sort of tie your hard drives together and use them all as one giant drive, which, by the way, is great for sample servers. They have specialty networking and power supplies that are unique to them. They're designed for high reliability. Again, Windows 10 sees it, no problem. That's the other advantage of. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call. The advantage of running these older servers is that all the drivers are already out there. So Windows 10 installs on it flawlessly. So you're going to have, so when you're looking at the price of this, you're going to have to remember, you're going to have to buy a copy of Windows for it. Mm-hmm. And the way you have to do that is you buy the install, or you go to the Microsoft site, you can download the ISO for Windows 10. You can install a trial version on the software, and then you have to go in and activate it. Do not do what I did, which is go onto newegg.com and buy a Windows 10 professional OEM version. It will not install on these because they've had Windows on them before, and the OEM versions of Windows 10 will not activate on something that's previously had a Windows install. So just go get the ISO from Microsoft, install the trial version, and then buy it right there within Windows. That works flawlessly. It works great. The OEM stuff does not work. Speaking of which, if anyone needs a copy of Windows 10 OEM, I've got a nice key sitting around that I can't use. I spent $200 on.
Man.
So that's the thing you're going to have to think about. The other thing you're going to have to think about is that these do not necessarily come with drives. You can buy them with drives, but they do not have great – the people I bought them from at least do not have great options in terms of like SSDs. Because, I mean, these days you can buy like a 2 terabyte SSD for $300. They don't even have the option to go above, I think, 500. So you're going to need to factor in the cost of some drives. So, that's probably going to actually – hilariously, that's probably going to like double the price of these by the time you actually do it. But, you could, say buy this $600 server with 96. I'm sorry, it's 92. It's 96 gigs of RAM. By the way, it's ECC RAM from what I can tell, which is higher end RAM, error correcting RAM. Insane price. Then you buy like a $200, $300 SSD, throw it in there, start using it, and then kind of incrementally add stuff. You're also going to have to go to Dell's site and learn how to use the RAID configuration utility because you're going to want these in RAID. My current one has two terabyte SSDs in RAID 1 for speed. I would not recommend using spinning drives in RAID because that will not actually get you anything for sample servers, because the disk bottleneck on sample servers is actually the seek time. It's the time that it takes to find the sample and start loading it. Once it starts loading the sample, usually the bandwidth on the motherboard is high enough that you're not really saturating it, but that first few milliseconds where it's trying to find the sample is the seek time, and RAID doesn't help you there because it's still just a bunch of spinning disks all tied together. So if you're going to do RAID, I would recommend SSDs because SSDs essentially have zero seek time. They know exactly where everything is at all times. They don't have to literally spin a disk to get to the sample. So you're going to have to buy those. The other thing you have to think about is networking. Obviously, these need to be on a gigabit network, so you're probably going to need to buy a gigabit switch. They're pretty cheap these days, but keep that in mind. And the last thing I would say is that these are super noisy. Okay, these are not designed to be in a studio, so you're probably going to need to host them somewhere else. So on the Junkie XL video, he shows a closet in that the house that he works out of, where he's installed them. I have them down in my mechanical room, down by the water heater. And my house is newer, so it happens to be wired for Ethernet, so I can do that. In my old house, which was built in 1954, what I probably would have done is just bought a 100-foot Ethernet cable, drill a hole in the floor down into the basement, throw them down there. But these are not going to be something you're going to want to put in your studio while you're working. They are incredibly loud
and hot.
And hot. Yeah. So there's something you're going to want to have in a different part of your building. So keep that in mind. So those are these sort of extra costs. Again, when you add that all up, it's probably not really $600 per. It's probably more like 12 to 13 to 15 per. Right. But again, considering that if you go try to buy like a PC with this stuff in it, you're not walking out the door for under $5K.
Yeah.
Shockingly good. I was shocked at how cheap these were. I immediately bought two because I didn't want them to run out because this is insane. The way that this and this is a great tip for just like if you're getting into the professional space, you've got some investments you're wanting to make into your setup. This is an amazing dollar per performance thing. I'm running it right now. Hilariously, I bought these. The iMac that I'd been using at a sample server, the hard drive died. So I immediately started using one of these to replace that, and it is running, just like butter. No hiccups, no nothing. This is a great way to do this. So
yeah. Well, I own Vienna Ensemble Pro as well, and I tried doing the server thing because I have when I bought my new Mac Pro, I have my old Mac Pro from 2010, it's only a quad core, but it's still it's a Xeon processor, which is a really good processor, and there's still people rocking these the cheese grater Mac Pros, the old ones. They're still using them to this day for their main machines because you can add new stuff to them, and the newer one you really can't do that stuff just besides RAM. You can swap out parts and stuff. So I was since mine's a quad core, I'm limited to 32 gigabytes. So I was hitting a brick wall every freaking time, and I have this situation you did, Curtis. I had it in my office or my studio, and I'm on the second floor, and I can't just drill a hole to my basement where I wanted to put it, and I don't have Ethernet in my house. So yeah, I was sitting in here in the summer with the air on. It was like 85 degrees in my office. And it was just like, okay, I got to get rid of this. And then I got my Mac Pro, and I just run everything on one machine. But I'm not doing full-fledged orchestral scores. I'm not running a huge template anymore. I'm kind of just use what I need at the time. But I have basic templates, and I never blow my machine up. And SSDs too they just like it's a night or day thing.
SSDs make a huge difference, and they use less RAM too because the hosting software is smart enough to see, I can just pull this off the disk. I'll only load the beginning of this into RAM, use a little bit less of it because I can pull it off the disk. Most I know Play is that smart. I'm sure Contact is absolutely that smart. There may be older VSTs that don't do that, but
probably Well, I would just want to say too. Also, you can run Vienna Pro on a single machine as well.
That's true. And depending on how you're running it, it's better. Vienna is a much more efficient use of resources on OS 10 than Logic is. Logic is a terrible VST host. It is very inefficient.
Yeah. So and just some system requirements of Vienna Pro is just PC Windows. I don't know if you can run a server on a. Yeah, you can. Mac 1012, 2 gigabytes of RAM, 4 recommended. So it's not that much, but to get your bang for the buck, you're gonna want to do way more.
Well, it'll run, but remember, it's effectively a way of modularizing hardware. You can run it on like a MacBook Air and run one sample.
That's true.
And run that externally if you so choose, and then run other samples somewhere. It basically makes it so that you can set up, create a setup with an infinite amount of computing resources for samples. It's really what it does.
Basically. It's just an efficient way of processing.
It's not just more efficient. It's like spreads out. It allows you to just keep adding RAM and disk to basically a giant pool per thing. Now, there are some problems with Vienna. If Vienna works by IP, it go like
Right.
like I save all my projects where I keep all the Vienna data in the project itself. But that means that if I load a project up and my IP addresses on my network have changed, it'll like throw a hissy fit
Yeah.
and not load them, and I
Oh
have to
yeah.
go show it where the new server is and probably rebuild the project and stuff. That can be annoying.
Yes.
So
Yes.
keep that in mind. You might want to just set up a template for Vienna where you say you can save the Vienna template. Like let's say you load an entire set of 64 string instruments. You can then go to Vienna and say, okay, save this configuration and reload it later. So you'll want to make backups like that.
Yep.
And I'm going to do a video, I think, on my YouTube channel of showing these R610s, how I set them up. I actually set them up with some spinning disks for the operating system because I'm tired of things crashing. So I like set up a RAID array where the disks mirror and there's a hot spare so that if one of the disks dies, it just fails over to the new one and doesn't I'd lose no downtime and stuff like that.
Right.
I can go into that on that. I'll do a video on that. Maybe I'll do that today.
Yeah, and we'll link it down below.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot, and if you're not an IT person, this running server hardware, I would say, is probably not for you. I happen to have worked in IT before, so I've set up giant sands and server farms and stuff before, so I'm a little bit I know a little bit about it. Servers get a little bit scary at times because they're not designed for a random person to just run them. These are usually in huge data centers with staff that support them.
Right.
But the nice thing is that they're made of the highest end components. I mean,
That's
these
true.
are very high quality components. All the servers, if you buy a server that's truly a rack mounted server, it will come with 2 power supplies, so that one of the power supplies dies, it just switches over to the other one and you can,
Yep.
swap it out and stuff. So, plus there's, always parts available, because they made and sold tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these. So there's parts everywhere, usually for cheap, especially if they're older.
And also,
So,
you can
I
run
mean-
them all the time. Like, there's not like a real computer. Like, you're not going to damage the computer while it's running because it's built to run. Because that's what servers do. They run 24/7.
Right. And they're designed to be like stacked, right? So they pull air through correctly, so you can just stack them. I don't
Yeah.
even have a rack right now. I'm gonna eventually get one. I don't even have a rack. I just have them sitting on top of each other. They just push air right through. So
That's basically what
it's-
the old Mac Pros, the cheese grater
Right.
ones. They're basically server machines. I
Right.
mean, and
Yeah.
people
Oh
were
no,
using
they
them
are.
as servers.
That's
Yeah.
basically a workstation, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's a workstation.
this is what the iMac Pros actually got, all these same components in it. Again, good luck walking out the door under
Yeah.
$5,000 for one of those. But this is I was just shocked at the dollar per performance.
Right.
Again, you have to bring something to the table. You're going to have to buy some components.
Mhm.
You're going to have to understand how to use these. I went onto YouTube and like looked up, like how are these laid out? What are these? These seem like a really great machines. These were originally designed to be cloud servers, so they were originally designed to actually host a bunch of virtual machines inside of them, which again is great for performance because it just means they've just got gobs of computing, of the ability to have computing resources. So I mean, I'm looking at the page right now, and you can even get one of these with 64 gigs and say 2 500 gig SSDs. Again, it's $670.
Nice.
That's add maybe $200 for Windows on that, 800. You're set. You're ready to go.
Yeah, I would
You're-
say
I
this
mean-
too. Like, if you're not ready for a server yet, and if you have an old computer laying around, that's not a few
Yeah,
years old.
absolutely.
You could start there and test out Vienna. So you start with a low cost. Because, like,
Right.
I'm gonna say one thing. I'm the type of guy that I'm so used to building my templates running on one machine, and just to have the template like that. And I used to use Cubase, so I could disable tracks, which makes it so much easier. Like, you could run like a 3,000 tracks and just disable them all and undisable them whenever you want to use them. So that's why I never looked at getting a server. I mean, it's nice. I would love it. But there is some downfalls I find myself, and that's why I stopped using it. And that's when I bought my Mac. I was like, all right, I'm just going to use a single machine. And I tried doing it because, like you said, Curtis, like if you fire up a new project and you don't have that instrument, you got to load it and you got to rebuild it, and you come back to a project sometime and you added new things to your template. It's a lot of that stuff. But for
Yeah,
me,
it can be
yeah.
a little bit confusing. I mean,
Yeah.
if you save the Vienna project data in your DAW project, generally you can avoid that. again, that requires you to kind of do some cheating with the network to like keep the IP addresses of all your sample servers the same. Which so like I used to use like a 10 dot whatever network, and I changed over to a new set of networking equipment, and it wanted to use 192.168. And so all my old stuff stopped working. Now it's not that big of a deal. I mean, it's maybe 10 minutes of going into the little Vienna plugin and saying, "Hey, dumb butt, the server's over here." But sometimes if you've made changes to since the last time you saved it in Vienna, you might have to go and mess with some mic settings or whatever.
Right.
I guess my thought is that what you gain in terms of performance, and again, this is for people who are running thousands of instruments, hundreds of instruments. If you're not running hundreds of instruments, probably not for you. Although,
that's true. Like if you're running a huge template,
when you're not hosting locally, you get much better DAW performance.
Like Junkie XL, dude, his template, like
it's huge.
It's like 7,000 tracks.
Yeah, it's huge. It's enormous. Yeah. And I don't own 10,000 tracks.
Well, at the end of the day, it's a workflow thing, I think. So if it fits your workflow, then I do it. But like for me, it's just too much complex. Like I said, I got so used to like working on one single machine, and I worked with Cubase when I did, that style of music, and I would just disable the tracks, and it just works for me because I'm not blowing up my computer. And I just
when you disable a track though, it's not playing it back, right?
Right. But if I don't have anything on it, what the hell am I using it for? So I kind of like. You know what I mean? Like, but the thing about Vienna, which makes it so cool, is that, like every track you have in your template, if you click on it, it's gonna play.
Yeah, it just plays back.
So that's awesome. But when I had to disable tracks, I had to I had D for that for disable, and it takes a second to load up. But when you have Vienna, you can just click on it and you can start playing usually. Right. So that's what's so. That's what I love about it.
Huge time saver.
Yeah,
because
that's
again,
what I love.
I'm running a massive,
yes,
full orchestral plus, all this hybrid synth stuff.
Yeah.
So. If I'm doing that on every track, it's gonna, I'm effectively just spreading out my load times.
Exactly.
I mean, and that's the other thing is when you're running these huge tracks, if the samples aren't loaded, I go in the morning. Sometimes it's reboot day. Like I try to reboot my machines every once in a while. And what I'll do is I'll come in, reboot my machines, get Viennas all running. I will literally say, load the project, go to Starbucks and get a coffee, come home. Watch a TV show, and then maybe my template's loaded, right? Like, because it takes like 800,000 years to load.
Right.
But again, with a server, you just leave it loaded. You just, you're not using that for anything, so you just leave it loaded in your basement or whatever.
And you shouldn't have to reboot it very, very often.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're in a place where you can, the things you need to think about with server hardware are noise, heat. So you're not going to want it in your studio.
Yeah.
So either be ready to drill a hole in the wall or the floor, which honestly is not that hard. I mean, in my old house, I ran some networking for it, and you just drill through the floor and go through the subfloor.
Yeah, because Wi-Fi is not going to work. Let's just be there.
Right.
You can't.
Yeah,
it has to be plugged in, right? You have to be Ethernet
I've used Wi-Fi before, and the thing about Wi-Fi is it will work when conditions are ideal, and then as soon as things start to degrade, like let's say your network's at 100%. Your network goes down to 99%.
Right.
It immediately you're starting to have problems. So Wi-Fi is generally not a great idea. I would not use anything that's noisy. Like, they have power line adapters that go through your power. Vienna is very sensitive because you got to think about what's happening is in your DAW, you're clicking a note and you're generating a MIDI event, right? It's sending that MIDI event over the network down to your server. Your server is accepting that MIDI event on whatever instance you've loaded. It's rendering the sound out as if it were running in your DAW. It is creating uncompressed wave audio, sending that back over the network to your DAW, which you then hear. So any jitter, any fighting for network resources. I mean, I had to switch out a router. I was mentioning that 10 dot network to the 192. The reason I had to do that was I was using some crappy router that had come with my Comcast modem, and it was not, the switch was just simply not up to the task of handling that much traffic on the network. I bought like a $20 or $30 like gigabit like and Netgear switch, and it was fine. That fixed it. But you gotta have the networking equipment. I these days I just buy enterprise networking equipment from Ubiquiti because then I never run into this problem.
Right.
So, but that's another thing you got to think about in terms of cost. Like how does it play into the cost? So, I mean, like I said, this isn't for everyone. But if it is for you, if this is something you've been looking into, from what I can tell, from a dollars per performance ratio, if you can deal with having this machine somewhere else in the building where you work, shockingly good, amazing value.
Yeah, time
So,
saver, definitely.
yeah, and time saver, yeah.
Yeah, because I have, like I said, I have it. I can do it if I want to. It's just at this time, like my workflow doesn't. I don't need to run 7,000 tracks.
I mean, like
you know?
Todd, like for you, I would say, so you're upstairs, you can't run something down to your basement. I mean, but do you have like a closet you can stick
Yeah,
this
I
in
tried
somewhere?
that. Yeah, I did that. It was okay, but dude, in the summer, man, I'm on the second floor, and it was
Right,
literally
but I
like
mean,
80 degrees.
can you run like, can you buy 100 foot? I mean, I don't know what your wife
No, I
thinks
have
about
one.
this,
Yeah,
but
no,
like a 100 foot
it's
Ethernet cable and run it
no.
to a different room and just have it in a corner somewhere.
Well, the one thing, well, I did. I had it like that. It's just the heat, man. It got so hot, and like I said, I was trying to load all my instruments on there, and I was locked at 32 gigabytes, and as you know, that goes very, very quickly. I tried to run like my, some of the stuff I always ran. It was more of a hassle for me because
Sure.
I'm just so into the
Yeah.
at the time. But now I'm not really doing that, so I only load up in an instance of what I need to use. Like if I'm using strings or whatever, I'll just load that in, and that's all I need. I don't need 7,000 tracks, because I'm doing mostly songwriting stuff right now.
Well, I'm
But-
glad you're on this because I think this is a good perspective too. Like if you don't need
Yeah,
a bazillion tracks,
it's overkill for
at your
me.
fingertip.
I love
Yeah.
the idea. It's like we see Junkie XL, we see Hans Zimmer running these templates that are 8,000-10,000 tracks. It's like, do we need that? No. Like I'm all about efficiency, and that's one thing I've learned. It's like I don't need, like, it's nice to have, because I found myself when I would have everything at my disposal, I never did anything. I was just like, oh, cool, this is cool, and I'm always worried about what tracks I have, and I was like, well, at the end of the day, I'm here to write music. So like I went down to a bare bones template, like stuff that I know that I always use all the time, and that's it. And then I put, like, I kind of stole this from Daniel James, like I put in template tracks for like Omnisphere or Contact, just kind of like nothing loaded. So if I needed that, I can put it in there and add a new instrument, and I put that within.
I still to this day run Omnisphere locally
Yeah, me
on
too.
my same DAW machine because it's so efficient.
Yeah, it is. If you don't have Omnisphere, go buy it.
Yeah, if you'd. By
that's
the
all you
way,
need.
yeah. I saw they're having a Gravity sale. I own Gravity.
Yeah.
Fine VST. There's uses for it, but
Ah.
Omnisphere is usually maybe the same price, and it's
beautiful.
magnitudes of order.
I haven't even
better than
cracked
any
the
other synth on the
surface of
market.
that DAW.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much stuff, and you can
Well,
buy
and you can buy
expansions.
third-party libraries
The
from like
Unfinished, go
Unfinished
check 'em
or
out. Yeah.
Plugin Guru. I've
Yep.
never used any of his, but I've just found him on YouTube, and
Yep.
he seems like he's got some great stuff.
Yeah, he shows how he does
mean,
the stuff too. Like I've watched a
the
few
cool
of his
thing about
stuff.
Omnisphere is it allows you to use a sample and then
Yes.
turn it into a synth.
Yeah, you can
which is-
record your own
which-
audio and import it in
Right.
and stretch it and make all this stuff, and
turn
it
it
is.
into it.
Yeah,
You can go
it's-
outside and or
yes.
there's construction or I could go record a dump truck or whatever, bring it
Yep.
in, put it in Omnisphere, make an instrument out of it.
Yeah, so that's valuable for us composers, especially like if you're on a film, if you want to create your own sounds or use stuff that's been in the movie for that effect. I know some composers get into that, like they use like props, record it, sample it, and make an instrument out of it. So to kind of give that. So yeah, if you don't have Atmosphere, like if you're looking for a VST or a synth, it's a no-brainer. Just go buy it. You'll thank yourself. I bought it years ago. I still have the box. I bought it when it was a box. Okay. So
Yeah, I remember using it back in like 2000,
I
maybe
think it
4
came out
or
in like
5.
2008, right, or something like that.
No,
or-
because it
Really?
existed when I was in college because
Okay,
we had it
okay.
on one of the machines in our little MIDI studio, and I remember using it. And at the time, I wasn't super into synth stuff. When
Yeah.
I was in college, it was like all I must write this orchestral pure or whatever.
Purist.
And I remember using it a little bit, but I sort of like whatever. But man, it is good. It is.
It
good.
is, dude.
Now that I live in the real world,
Yeah.
it's great.
like when I record like just rock tracks, dude. I'll put something just underneath, like a little synth or a little atmospheric, just to put something in there, just to thicken up. But yeah,
Well,
dude.
it's one of these things since it imports audio. You can use a different
Yeah.
sample. Like you could go grab Eric Whitacre choirs,
Mhm.
play a note, export it, and throw it into Omnisphere and do insane stuff to it. So
Yeah, so if you're a sound designer, it's a no-brainer. Like,
Oh,
get on
absolutely.
it now. I think they were having a sale on it, or I don't know. I think they recently, but yeah, even if it's 500 or whatever the price, I'm telling you, if you do this for a living and you make money from music, you'll get that money back within like maybe 1 or 2 projects. I mean, it's so worth it, and you'll be using it on everything.
Yeah.
They got atmospheric stuff, like ambient stuff. Oh god, everything's covered in there. Synths, you name it, if you need it, Atmosphere's got it. So, and we're not getting paid to say that. We're just telling you because we use it and love it.
Oh yeah, I get paid to promote any samples.
Yeah, me either.
Well, I made one demo for one.
I did one time, but I didn't get paid for it. I just did it because I thought it was cool. It was the choir one was really good though. It was really cool. Her voice is amazing. I can't think of it right now. It's escaping me. It's on my YouTube channel.
Well, if you ever hear me say anything about Evolution Texas Twang, I did a demo for them.
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
you can just not trust anything I say. It's amazing, by the way. So, what are our picks of the week? I think we should move on to picks of the week and call this a podcast.
Get going here. Well, I kind of previewed it earlier with my little joke of the mandolin, but that's probably the most recent instrument I picked up. I haven't really been buying samplers because I went on a little splurge at the turn of around I think December, January, because I was using some stuff for ambient projects, and I'm taking a little break from it right now, but kind of getting more focused into songwriting. So I picked up a little cheap mandolin. And it's, even though we're sample library composers and stuff, you kind of have to think out of the box sometimes and pick up real instruments, tactile instruments, because you can put this stuff into your compositions and brighten it up and bring more livelihood to your tracks. I'm telling you, I know we've been, like, most of us, we just do sample libraries, like I'll go buy a banjo one or acoustic guitar, but you'd be surprised how much a real instrument will make your track feel so much more lively, and so I'm just on a kick of, I got an acoustic guitar, and I'm trying to do some tambourines, shakers, and like this, I have a jumble, I can't think of the name of the drum, but it's not a bongo, but it's like a bongo. And so I'm trying to just, get creative and, I'm going a different route with my music and, because this is more personal music. It's not like orchestral stuff. So songwriting type things, and it's just getting cool. So I think my pick of the week is just not a specific instrument, but just go out there and find something. If it's a harmonica, and you'll be surprised. Maybe you'll find a new idea that starts a new track. So that's kind of my pick of the week, is just acoustic instruments. Anything, a guitar, acoustic guitar, banjo, mandolin, harmonica. You'd be surprised what you could do with it in a track.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely think that's a good tip. I'd also throw in there that, I will occasionally just have a choir track. I'll just track myself singing the choir part too, add it in. Sometimes you get a little bit of just a different feel to it. You can do that even with terrible equipment. I think I did that with a laptop microphone one time. You put enough reverb on it, no one will notice.
Yeah, that's true. Blend it.
So, just throw that stuff in wherever you can. It makes your stuff just a little bit more unique, a little bit more not quite that thing I've heard out of that box. So
that's true.
My pick of the week is sort of already been discussed. It's that Dell server, just because, you can pick these up super cheap in terms of just like performance per dollar. You cannot beat this stuff, and I would also add on to this that, if you want to, if maybe even $600, $600 is a lot of money. That's a whole giant nail. That's Spitfire strings or whatever, right? Like, you want even cheaper ones. You can buy cheap stuff just looking at these. You can look at older Dell servers. You can look at newer Dell servers if maybe you want a little bit more oomph. That there's the cool thing about looking at discontinued corporate equipment is that there's a whole range, everything down to the lowest. Oldest equipment that no one's used in 20 years, all the way up to modern stuff. This is a great place to kind of eBay's a great place to look. You can even go into places like Newegg and stuff. You can find, always be looking for something cheap. And again, I just got to throw out a shout out to Vienna, because it allows you to do that. It allows you to, it it can be Windows, it can be Mac, it can't be Linux, which really is someday they will have a Linux version and I will run that. But, you can really take your dollars a long way, especially if you're like me and you're an orchestral person who needs to have hundreds of thousands and billions of articulations and instruments loaded. Because remember, it's not just loading a violin, it's loading the legato violin and the short violin and the spiccato violin and the pizzicato violin.
That's
and
correct.
one instrument becomes 10 tracks real fast. So
it's just
keep
efficiency
that in
and
mind
workflow,
as an
and
option.
it's it just helps your efficiency. Like I said, I would totally utilize it, but like it's just overkill for what I need right now.
Absolutely.
But I bought it because I future-proofed myself just in case. Like if I ever need it, I already got it.
Well, Todd, Vienna Ensemble Pro 7 is out real soon, so you can buy it again.
Yes, I know. That's the only bad thing about this crap. It's like DAWs and stuff. I mean, to be honest here, like I've switched back to Logic, just because it works well for what I'm doing right now. Like I don't have to think about stuff. Like it just works. And I used to use Logic for my, my band stuff.
Right.
So I just
you don't see a lot of high-end people. You see them all using like Cubase for film. But then you know what I saw on YouTube was Harry Gregson Williams posted some MIDI mock-ups from the new How to Train Your Dragon on his YouTube channel, and he works in Logic. So I feel like
there's a lot of people that use Logic, man. It's more than people think.
Good to go.
Yeah, I mean, I have Cubase. I mean, I didn't get Cubase 10 because it's like I just why, it's like I'm sick of the DAW game. I mean, I was looking at Studio One just because like it's like a hybrid of Cubase and Logic, and I've seen it and it's cool. But I'm done with the DAW switching. It's like Logic works. It's at the end of the day, I'm here to create music. It doesn't matter what DAW I use, as long as I can record music and do what I need to do, it works. I mean, Reaper. I have a video about like picking a DAW for composers, and I covered like the main core ones, and I got flamed because I didn't put, I think, Studio One and Reaper and all this. It's like, dude, most professionals or people aren't using that. These are DAWs that are people.
Cool. I mean, I'm sure there are film composers
there
running
are.
on Ableton or Fruity Loops. That's probably true, and that's fine. I mean, I don't say that to denigrate those. If it works for you,
then use it.
Super awesome. I mean, the guy I worked with on Starbound used Fruity Loops. That's how he did everything. And from what I can tell, it seems like a perfectly functional DAW with a terrible name.
Well, I just think it's like eventually you're gonna. Maybe not, but I think you're going to get limited with some of those DAWs. But like I said, at the end of the day, it's a tool. Who cares? And I don't play that. I just said, like, if you're new to the game, here are some good ones to look at so you can pay now and not worry about it.
There's free ones.
There's free
ones. You can get Audacity. You can get, there's another one. There's another free Linux one. Anyway, and if it works for, I was watching somebody talking about MuseScore, which is a free engraving software, open source engraving software. If that works for you, awesome.
Use what works for you. Hey, Chris, so what's your pick of the week?
Yeah, so this is going to be my pick of the week, and I wanted to discuss the Red Room Audio Traveler series, which I recently did a review for, which it's going to be posted soon. But the Traveler series is essentially a collection of 2 fiddles and some Irish bodhrans, and which are kind of like Irish drums. So the 2 fiddles that were sampled were a Celtic fiddle and a bluegrass fiddle, and they were actually recorded in the locations where that kind of music was actually originated from. So in Kentucky and Ireland, respectively, which is really cool. They recorded these fiddles in a dry studio, so you can add your own reverb and lace your performances together, because these are multi-sampled instruments. Plus, they also come with pre-recorded loops and phrases just to add a little bit of realism. I was actually fortunate enough to do a demo for Red Room Audio, and I was using the bluegrass fiddle, but because I don't do any country music, or I don't know that style at all, I kind of changed it up a little bit, and it's kind of a testament to what the fiddle can actually do when you have all those different articulations to choose from and put them together. It actually is pretty convincing. When you load up the fiddles by default, the legato is activated, so you can just play out of the box and it sounds really, really good. But yeah, there's a ton of choice to choose from in terms of articulations. So if you're planning to write country music or Celtic music, definitely look into what the style is kind of like and draw inspiration from that, because I think these libraries can do a very good, convincing job at those styles. So. Oh,
there you go. It's a mandolin. Hey, we're going country.
You had that ready, didn't you? Yeah, that's.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that's something I bought, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But I want to mention, Chris, Red Room Audio. I actually.
Yes.
they offer free instruments, snap, claps, stomps, and shouts. And they have this thing called Palette Primary Colors,
Yes.
which is really cool. It's free. So we'll
Yes.
have a link down in the show notes. But yeah, definitely go check those out. They're free. I'm actually thinking about using that snaps, claps, and stomps thing for a track to get kind of interesting with it, you know, and do some stuff. But yeah, so I just wanted to mention that as well. But
I think a band that's really good at using claps and stomps is Imagine Dragons. If you guys know that.
Yeah.
I think they do all that anthemic kind of music. It's really cool.
Yeah.
And anyway.
Wow. But yeah, sorry, I had to get cheesy there with the mandolin.
Yeah.
Nice.
I thought you were gonna play Composing Mid Symbol there for a second.
No. Well, I could. I should write a mandolin piece on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, but no, that's cool, man. Like, yeah, Red Room Audio. I actually retweeted two of their things, and they liked it and followed me on Twitter. So, I think are they kind of a smaller developer? I think they are, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah.
Recently, I think they only became established over a year ago, so it's relatively new.
Yeah, but definitely go check out those free libraries. It's redroomaudio.com, and just go to their instruments and free instruments. The primary colors thing actually is really cool. It's it's got like strings, woodwinds, and brass, and I think it's all ensembles, and a couple set of articulations, and it's actually pretty cool. It actually sounds really, really good. But it's free, so you can't beat free.
That's right.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Composing Made Simple. Thanks again for tuning in and listening to us. As always, you can head on over to composingmadesimple.com, and you'll find the information about me, Chris, and Curtis. Also, you'll find the information on how to join our Discord server. We really appreciate it if you come on over there and hang out with us. As always, if you're listening to this on iTunes, please leave us a review. And as always, thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.